Hello and welcome to the big picture. As the country is gripped for the last couple of days over the issue of former IPL chief Lalit Modi's travel papers and the role of External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj in it, some larger issues emerging out of it needs to be discussed. The issue is of conflict of interest. As is well known, conflict of interest is the clash between a person's public duty and the private interests, especially when that person happens to be in a decision-making position in government. While the role of public representatives is of utmost importance in this context, the issue of conflict of interest is all-encompassing, extending beyond just public representatives. Every time a scandal or an issue like the present one breaks out, this has been discussed and debated. However, even our constitution is silent on it, and though there have been some efforts at the parliamentary level to deal with this problem, there has not been any concrete parameters about what constitutes conflict of interest. So is there a need for a law to deal with it? How practical is it? What should it encompass? And more importantly, how to deal with those who cross the line and indulge in it? These and many related issues need a debate which we'll attempt today. To discuss this, I have with me A.N. Tiwari, former Secretary, Department of Personnel and Training, Government of India, and also former Chief Information Commissioner, PDT Achary, former Secretary General Lok Sabha, Siddharth Varadarajan, founding editor, TheWire.in, and on the phone line from Srinagar is Prashant Bhushan, leading advocate. Welcome to all of you. Prashant, coming to you first, you know, this issue keeps on coming up periodically whenever there is a scandal or a controversy. But then after that, people forget about it. We have not had any concrete, thing coming out of these kind of debates in the past. Now you have been talking of a law. Why do you think a law is necessary at this point of time? Prashant, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
No, law is necessary because this is a lacuna in our Prevention of Corruption Act. You see, the Prevention of Corruption Act deals with bribe taking, etc., but it does not deal properly with conflicts of interest, which is also a kind of bribery which certainly influences the decisions of public officials.
Right.
For example, there are a large number of cases where public officials deal with the files of a particular company while they are in office, and immediately after retirement and sometimes after taking premature retirement, they take up jobs in those very companies.
Right.
Now, this is clearly a conflict of interest which influences the decisions of these people. So, therefore, there needs to be a law.
Prashant, when you talk of bureaucrat, you're talking of bureaucracy. But you know, it may be a little more easier to deal with the issues of bureaucrats. But when it comes to politicians, people in authority, ministers, MLAs, MPs, don't you think that it becomes a little more complicated? You know, there are very grey areas in this?
Well, there are grey areas, but the thing is that there are clear cases or obvious cases of conflict of interest. For example, there are cases where the Sushma Swaraj case, for example. Now, your daughter is a lawyer for a particular person, and by way of she is getting paid fees by that person. Thereafter, you as a minister, you start dealing with the, in your official capacity, with the case of that person. Obviously, you may not be totally unbiased while you are doing that because...
but the argument, Prashant, is that she was just one of the junior lawyers, you know, along with the senior who was actually handling the case. She was just one of the juniors among many of them.
Maybe, but if she was being paid by him, by Lalit Modi, then that does create a conflict of interest. You are right that there can be grey areas. There can be where the conflict of interest is of a minor nature, and that is why we need to define this. There are two things which need to happen. We need to define conflicts of interest, and we need to define what needs to be done in different kinds of conflicts of interest. In some cases, the official would have to just disclose his conflict of interest, but in other cases, the official should be prohibited from dealing with those cases
Absolutely.
where they have a serious conflict of interest.
Okay, but just stay on, Prashant. I'll come back to you, Mr. Achary. Mr. Achary, at the legislative level, at the parliamentary level, how seriously has this issue been taken so far? If I remember, 2008, that Kishore Chandra Dev committee had made certain recommendations about this, but nothing emerged out of it.
See, this term conflict of interest, as Mr. Prashant Bhushan has said, has not been defined anywhere, but all the time people talk about it. Now, in Parliament, of course, often this issue comes up and a lot of discussion takes place and all that. There, if a member of Parliament is nominated to a particular committee, and that committee takes up some issue in which he has some personal interest, and then whether he should continue on that committee or not, it becomes an issue, and then the speaker decides it on the basis of the information that is made available to the speaker. Actually, the point is, when we talk about conflict of interest, what exactly is the dimension of the interest that is involved in it? That is the basic question in there. Now, there is one rule in the Lok Sabha's rule book, which kind of describes this. It says that the interest which is involved should be very direct, very personal, and it must be pecuniary. These are the three elements which are required or which should be looked into when you discuss this issue, when you deal with this issue. Now, of course, the media has been discussing this Sushma Swaraj's case for the past 2-3 days.
Do you see a conflict of interest there?
Well, I don't see a conflict of interest in that sense. Because, as I said, a very direct interest, very personal, and a pecuniary interest. These are three important elements in that. So, if you look at this from this angle, I don't think there is such a conflict of interest in this.
In this case.
What exactly is the conflict? What exactly is the interest which is in conflict with a public duty? Her daughter is a lawyer. She is adult. Her husband is a lawyer. And he has admitted that he has been a lawyer for this man for the past 22 years or something. But they can take their own independent decisions and all that. And their being a lawyer doesn't come into conflict with Sushma Swaraj functioning as Minister for External Affairs. Well, I can say, talking about that particular case, I can say that it may be a case of indiscretion. Perhaps she has not exercised the kind of caution which, as a Minister for External Affairs, she should exercise. It may be a case of that, a case of indiscretion.
Okay. Siddharth, how would you look at it? Apart from this existing, the present case of Sushma Swaraj, Lalit Modi, the larger issue also.
Well, it's clear to me that there is a conflict of interest. And conflicts of interest don't have to involve a pecuniary gain in a direct manner. The fact of the matter is that any public official, when being put in a position of adjudicating or taking a that is not routine, which involves discretion, and where that person has associations or connections either directly or indirectly, and in this case, Ms. Swaraj had both kinds of connections. She personally knew Mr. Lalit Modi and had sought favors from him in the past. And her daughter was representing Mr. Lalit Modi in a case that the Ministry of External Affairs, which Sushma Swaraj heads, was taking an opposing view on, which was the question of the passport revocation case. So the least that Sushma ji ought to have done is to have passed the request on or the file to perhaps the Foreign Secretary or to the Finance Ministry for a second opinion, so that the conflict of interest or the appearance of conflict of interest is nullified or diluted or negated.
Okay.
Now,
But what about the...
have seen from information in the public domain...
What about the larger issue by Siddharth? Should there be a law? Is there a scope for a law on this kind of an issue?
Because, the Indian public life is rife with conflicts of interest. Perhaps on one of your earlier shows, we discussed members of parliament with obvious commercial interests sitting in standing committees of parliament that have to do with their industry. We saw the unhealthy and unseemly spectacle of members of parliament who are connected to the tobacco industry coming out and declaring that you can't have 85% pictorial warnings on cigarette packets because they claimed Indian health studies don't establish that tobacco is injurious for health. So, the number of MPs who have this kind of interest, conflict of interest, there urgently needs to be a law. I think declaring assets is not enough. I think Parliament should not allow MPs who have an interest in a particular industry to be involved in standing committees, certainly public officials and ministers.
Okay.
When they, when they know somebody who is appealing to them for discretion, should have better sense than to accede to these requests themselves.
Okay. We are now joined in by Ashok Tandon, senior journalist, who was also the media advisor to former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Before I come to you, Ashok Tandon, let me get to Mr. Tiwari in on this. Mr. Tiwari, you have handled these kind of issues as DOPT General, as Secretary of the DOPT, and I suppose as Chief Information Commissioner also you must have come across such cases. Now, apart from the specific instance of the latest case, the larger issue of conflict of interest, as far as bureaucrats are concerned, there have been certain there are certain rules probably on that. But do you think that these rules have been enforced properly, or do you think that there needs to be a larger look at this whole issue?
Mr. Nikam, it is like this. By its very nature, it is perhaps not possible to have a specific law dealing with conflict of interest. I do not know any major democracy in the world where such a law exists. But what happens is there are legal provisions in myriad laws. It is also part of the conduct rules. And except perhaps Slovenia, nowhere there is a specific conflict of interest law per se. Because conflict of interest itself is a very layered concept.
Right.
You do not know where indiscretion ends and conflict of interest begins.
Right.
Now, most of the matters which we have in mind when we talk about conflict of interest is financial indiscretion, or financial benefit to somebody else, or some other kind of gratification. All these are covered by specific laws, including anti-corruption law. In the anti-corruption law, there are provisions that if a person tries to help somebody, which ends up endangering the interest of the government or the institution he serves, he is liable, regardless of whether there is a net loss or gain. Now, this kind of laws are there, and institutions have their own specific laws, and there are conduct rules. One of the conduct rule provision is that no one should join a private sector after retirement unless the government permits, and surely not before 2 years have elapsed. So these kind of scattered provisions are all over, and by their very nature, these provisions are bound to be scattered.
But how far? But Mr. Tiwari, Sorry, Mr. Tiwari, but how far has this, what you spoke about, that the bureaucrats should not join private sector, how far has, and also there was some kind of an amendment or changes to these rules in 2011, making it much more easier for the bureaucrats to move over to the private sector or even work in private sector.
It has been made much easier. Mr. Nikam, what happens is there is a provision in the conduct rules which allows a civil servant in the higher civil services to take a lien on the government and join and work in the private sector for a certain year of time. And in every state, there are at least a couple of half a dozen officers who are working like this in private sector, and they will eventually return to the government. Now, the question that was asked is, if the government is permitting the public employees to go and serve in the private sector and then return to the job, and this doesn't affect his demeanor or his approach to the private sector, why should there be a very stringent law about his joining the private sector after retirement?
Okay.
Now, there could be two opinions about this, but there is certainly a viewpoint.
Absolutely.
Now, my point is slightly different.
Yes.
I'm trying to say that by its very definition, conflict of interest is a risk. It is a collection of circumstances in which the risk of professional judgment favoring a secondary interest in preference to a primary interest exceeds. Now,
right.
It is therefore, according to me, the conflict of interest is not a legal provision. It is a multiple layers below that provision, because the legal aspects of it is already covered. You may debate about whether that coverage is good enough or not, but there is a cover.
Okay, that's interesting.
And therefore, unless there is a
please finish.
Unless there is a primary interest, identifiable primary interest, and there is a secondary interest which somebody prefers, I think conflict of interest is not attracted.
Okay. Before I come to Ashok Tandon, Prashant, would you like to respond to what Mr. Tiwari said?
Yeah, you see, it's not very difficult to define conflicts of interest. One of the most common kinds of conflict of interest which I have come across is people, public servants and bureaucrats dealing with the files of particular companies and organizations, and thereafter, soon thereafter, or immediately after retirement,
joining them.
Joining those very organizations, taking up jobs or consultancies with those very organizations.
Right.
Now, a conflict of interest law would seek to prohibit this from happening, so that if you have dealt with the official file of a particular company in your official capacity, then you would be prohibited from joining that company or taking up a job or a consultancy with that company.
But Prashant, what Mr. Tiwari is saying, that there are already rules or code, the conduct rules or even laws which deals with this kind of issues. It's just another matter that it may not have been implemented in the spirit that it should be.
The rule only says that, at best, the rule says that there will be a cooling off period.
Yes.
Or that you will have to take permission from the government.
Okay. But Prashant, I'll come back to you.
And doesn't penalize this kind of situation. Actually, we dealt with this. We had a People's Tribunal on the World Bank and IMF.
Yes.
And I did a paper studying. The issue was, why is it that various government officials routinely ask the government to follow the policies prescribed by the World Bank or the IMF.
Okay.
Even if they are not in public interest. And we found something very interesting, that most of these people, the finance secretaries, the chief economic advisors, the deputy chairman of the planning commission, and the chairman of the Reserve Bank, who deal with economic policies involving the World Bank or IMF, etc., more than half of them had taken up jobs with the World Bank or IMF immediately after retirement or just before they took those decisions.
Okay.
So therefore, these are all serious problems
Absolutely.
of conflicts of interest.
Okay, Prashant, please stay back. I'll come back to you. The larger issue, Ashok Tandon, this what we were discussing about bureaucracy and things like that is on one side. The other side is the political conflicts of interest. You think that a time has come, Siddharth Varadarajan thinks that a time has come when we need to have a law on this.
See, world over, a debate is already going on whether we should have a law on conflict of interest or not. But as one of my fellow panelists mentioned, that so far there is no consensus even in America or even in Britain. Now, having said that, see, I would like to say one thing, that the conflict of interest rules are very clear that there has to be a financial relationship, because that is something which you can quantify and identify. And I was listening to one of my friends who was specifically mentioned, I think in response to your query about the current debate going on in India. Now, I am afraid that we are jumping the gun. See, the conflict of interest relates to professionals. Now, here in this case, the External Affairs Minister is not doing a professional job. As far as the secondary conflict of interest category comes in, there has to be a financial relationship. Now, in this case, I'm afraid there is no financial relationship as such which has been brought
established
to notice
so far.
So far are brought by the media, which has been doing a media trial for the last 3-4 days.
Right.
Now, what the media is trying to do is they are trying to jump the gun by, it's a conjecture that they feel that there is a conflict of interest. So, my humble submission is that nothing has come out concrete which establishes a conflict of interest in respect of what has been done.
In this case.
I think to name somebody and say that there is a clear conflict of interest, as one of my friends was saying, I think it will not be appropriate.
Okay, but as far as this case is concerned, you have your opinion on this. But on the larger issue, as far as politicians are concerned, elected representatives, ministers, MLAs, MPs, do you think that there is a need for a conflict of interest law? Because we have seen any number of cases across the country, both at the national level and the states level, so many, very, very brazen cases of conflict of interest.
See, I think there should be a debate on this issue. There should be a healthy debate. But unfortunately, what happens is that only when the media picks up a case and then we start a debate about it. Why can't our parliamentarians during the session or otherwise talk about it? Let there be debate whether we need, in a democracy like India, whether we need a law or conflict of interest. But whatever I have also read, the debate is going on.
Okay.
But nothing has come out so far.
Nothing concrete has emerged so far.
Yes.
Mr. Achary, this 2000, I was mentioning to you about you were very much I think the Secretary General of the Lok Sabha. When this happened, the MPs, some MPs got caught in this scandal. And then a committee was set up under Kishore Chandra Dev. They gave a report. And then there was some discussion about, whether there should be some kind of a conflict of interest, rules or code or whatever has to be. What happened? Has there been any such, why did it just dissipate after that?
See, there was certainly a lot of discussion at that time because what happened that day was something which was unprecedented.
Right.
The MPs displayed notes in the House and they said this was the money which was being used to buy over MPs. Kind of thing. And later, of course, Mr. Kishore Chandra Dev was made chairman of a committee which looked into it. But then, that committee had gone into the question of privileges and all that, breach of privilege and contempt of the House and things like that.
No, there was also the issue of members declaring their interests. That the register, register to be kept.
Register of interest.
What has happened to that?
Register of interest.
Yes.
That has actually not taken off the ground because as it usually happens, when something happens suddenly, then naturally there will be a lot of discussion and then the parliamentarians will all express their horror and shock and all that. And then later on, it's just like a flash in the pan. Later on, it all disappears. And then nothing gets done.
So that's what has happened in this case.
But as I was mentioning in the beginning, in the context, in the parliamentary context, there of course there is a particular rule, but that is limited to the membership of a committee. A member who has some interest.
But they should not be.
That is there. But then.
But there are larger issues.
There are larger issues, certainly larger issues.
And it encompasses not just members, ministers, everybody.
It is not confined to that. It's not confined to the members. It has a larger, dimension. So certainly, and that is what the whole we are discussing for the past 2-3 days.
Siddharth, you think that this register of interest of the MPs or even at the state level MLAs, would that be adequate, or you think that there needs to be a law?
You see, it would have been adequate if Indian investigative agencies functioning in an independent manner were able to go through and track changes in this register of interests or the asset declarations, and on the basis of very obvious and glaring discrepancies, go after these politicians or bureaucrats or judges or whatever. But unfortunately, things don't work that way in this country. Right? You can look at two asset declarations made by somebody within a gap of 5 years and correlate the enormous growth of assets with that person's known sources of income, and it's not very difficult to conclude that such a person has obviously acquired wealth from illicit sources. But the law does not take its own course in this country. We are all familiar with this. So that's why I think it's important to be as narrow and specific in prohibiting certain kinds of associations as possible. And as Prashant was saying, there should be penal sanctions attached to violation of these norms.
Okay.
Let's not forget the fundamental principle, right? By conflict of interest, we mean that an individual in a position to take a decision ends up taking a decision that is clouded, that his or her judgment is clouded by the considerations
by the private
and that person then takes a wrong decision. Now, in the instant case, we know that Sushma Swaraj took a wrong decision. There were no humanitarian grounds for Mr. Modi to have his travel facilitated in the manner in which Ms. Swaraj did for him. Now the question you have to ask is, why did she then do that?
Let me see again what we are trying to say.
Siddharth.
Conflict of interest rules are very clear. There has to be a relationship.
There are no rules so far. That's the whole problem.
The world over, whatever is believed about conflict of interest, there has to be a relationship which is generally financial. In this case, nobody's case that there is a financial relationship. So I think we will be deviating from the debate.
The whole problem is
if we go into specific case.
No, the whole problem is that there are no parameters. Everybody has their own way of decide. Prashant, very quickly, how do you react to this? And then, as far as politicians, elected representatives are concerned, you think some kind of a code of conduct is enough, because law can be very complicated to make a law.
Not at all. The code of conduct is of no use whatsoever. Codes of conduct are flouted every day. Law is not very difficult at all. I am myself a member of a committee, of a civil society committee, which is in the process of drafting a comprehensive bill on conflicts of interest. Mr. Nachiappan had introduced such a bill in Parliament.
Right.
And time has certainly come to make such a bill.
Okay.
One can codify the situations which could be called obvious conflicts of interest situations.
Okay.
Prohibit those and penalize those.
Absolutely. Okay, Mr. Tiwari, very, very quick last words to you. Do you think, as in the case of elected representatives, some kind of a law is possible?
Actually, I am an anti-law type of a person. I don't believe that every aspect of human life or civic life must be covered by some sort of a law all the time, because in that sense, it is quite possible to escape the rigors of law, and people are escaping. Each time you create a law, there are 200 ways which are found to... Now, the point which I'm trying to emphasize is, we have to go beyond the legality of a conflict of interest and look at transparency, look at openness, look at orderliness, look at routinization, look at digitization of system, technology introduction, making systems impersonal. Only with this, all these issues will get resolved, not through laws.
Okay, sir. We completely run out of time. Sorry. So, but the fact that this panel itself is divided on whether there should be a law or not means that there needs to be much more debate on this issue, as Mr. Ashok Tandon rightly pointed out. Hopefully, there will be much more debate on this issue, and we'll come to some kind of a conclusion. Hopefully, in the next Parliament session, we'll find some debate on this. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, The Big Picture, same time tomorrow.